The Roman Catholic Church has a new leader. He is U.S. Cardinal Robert Prevost, the first American to be elected Pope. He will be known as Pope Leo XIV. Now, he's taking after Leo XIII, who devoted his papacy to social justice issues. Leo succeeds Pope Francis, who died last month. The new 69-year-old pontiff hails from Chicago. He is also a citizen of Peru, spending most of his career there as a missionary. Pope Leo was considered a surprise choice. He became a cardinal just 2 years ago, rarely gives interviews, and is said to have a shy personality. Well, joining us now is Dr. Paul Michael Hedges, Professor of Interreligious Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Welcome, Dr. Hedges. First of all, everyone's calling it a surprise choice, but do you also see it as a significant choice in terms of the direction of the Catholic Church?
It is significant because it tells us a lot, partly because of his young age. He's only 69, which is young for a cardinal. And this tells us that the Church expects him to be there for quite a long time. And sometimes after you've had a pontiff in place for quite some time, particularly somebody like Francis, who has made some changes of sort of direction in how he's sort of presenting the Church, they will often sort of go for somebody perhaps sort of older, an interim person, just sort of balance the boat. But with this new young person, he's clearly sort of there to sort of continue this legacy. And you mentioned his name, Leo, referencing the previous sort of Pope Leo XIII. But Leo was also the name of one of Francis's, this is St. Francis of Assisi, one of Francis's disciples who really carried on his legacy. So there could be various layers of this name, Leo, that he's taken on.
Interesting. Now, would you characterize him as maybe the right pope for the right time? I'm wondering, because what do we know about his beliefs that, well, may have helped him win the vote, but also be his compass in pressing world issues facing us today and the increasing geopolitical uncertainty?
He's probably a slightly more moderate figure than Pope Francis. Pope Francis, of course, was a very, as the Catholic sort of pontiff, he was a conservative figure in many ways. But there are certain ways that sort of Pope Leo is probably a little bit sort of more unifying across the Church. He's an expert in sort of canon law, the sort of the legal teachings of the Church, which will appeal to the Catholic side. He's also been less pastorally sort of welcoming to sort of the LGBT community. And of course, the Catholics, conservative side in the Church, in places like Africa, this will be seen as something sort of positive. But at the same time, as I said, he's building upon this legacy of the social work to put the poor at the forefront of this, to put sort of migration and immigrants, the oppressed in society very much at the front of this. And a lot of this will have been part of his appeal in different ways. Of course, most of the cardinals, I said most of the cardinals who were voted, of course, were appointed by Francis himself. And so that idea that, many of them would have supported his legacy, not all, of course. Francis was very inclusive, taking cardinals from many different sort of factions within the Church, not simply those who agreed with him. But of course, there's many within the Church who understand what Francis was doing, why he wanted to go the way he did. And this is continuing with a figure like Leo XIV.
How would you characterize reaction and even the significance of his appointment, particularly here in the Asian region? How has that been perceived? And I also wanted to point out that the Vatican is one of 12 countries to retain formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan, the self-ruled island. How does that all play out?
And of course, everyone has really sort of welcomed the Pope from many different quarters. He's actually quite well known in Asia already, particularly Southeast Asia, but all across Asia, because he was head of the Augustinian order, one of the groups of friars within the Church, and as the global head of that, he travelled through the whole world. So he's been several times to the Philippines, he's been to Taiwan, to Vietnam, to India, to many countries across Asia. And of course, that means he's got a network that people know him and like him. Of course, they find him a very appealing figure. And that was no doubt sort of part of this. But again, it will be reassuring, I think, for the church in Asia, which is now one of the largest growing parts of the Catholic Church, that somebody is coming in who really understands what's coming in here. And you mentioned before that he was the first American Pope. Of course, he's the second American Pope. Pope Francis, of course, came from Argentina. He is the first Pope from the United States of America. But again, he's got very strong connections with Peru. He was there for over 40 years, so over half his life. He was in Peru. And so he appeals, if you like, both, if you like, perhaps to parts of the Western Church, the global North, but also to the global South. And I said he then has these connections through this sort of order of friars who are engaged in the world, doing social work and many activities. So he knows the issues in sort of every corner of the church, particularly sort of here in Asia. And so figures in the Philippines like Cardinal Tagle, who some mention as a potential sort of Pope himself, I understand he has good relations with him. And so there is already a working relationship there with many of these Asian cardinals, with the Asian church here.
So in a way, he could hit the ground running, so to speak. One of our
Yes.
correspondents described this time for the Pope as time to set up shop, so to speak. So I'm wondering, what does that entail? What's next for the Pope and his immediate agenda for the Church?
This is always hard to tell, because sometimes when somebody becomes Pope, they come out in quite unexpected ways that nobody expected them to do beforehand. I think partly peace will be a big part of this. In Pope Leo's sort of first talk on this, he spoke about peace as an important thing. And again, interestingly, there he spoke in Italian and in Spanish. Also, of course, he is completely fluent. English is his first language, but he's speaking there in Italian and Spanish. So he's speaking sort of outside sort of the Western world, outside his own American sort of context. Of course, the Spanish particularly speaks to the Latin and South America, which is where most of the globe's Catholics are. But his very conscious decision not to speak English, I think, is telling us that he wants to be a Pope of the globe. He wants to go beyond the old sort of Anglo-American and sort of European centres of the church in what he's doing. In terms of sort of where he's going to go, I said the name gives us some hints of this. And perhaps another sort of reference in his name, Leo says many layers. The first Leo, Leo I, is seen as a peace builder, somebody who sort of stopped Attila the Hun is how he's remembered. And again, I said this talk around peace will build into this. So how far he follows in what Francis has done in sort of intervening quite strongly in places like Ukraine and Gaza, we will see. As Cardinal before this, he's been quite quiet on these issues. So whether this becomes something he speaks about more is an issue. But of course, with Francis, there were then tensions with both Russia and Israel, and perhaps he will want to sort of soften some of that, sort of be more inclusive. And of course, you mentioned Taiwan as well before. Of course, the church's relationship with sort of China's, the new superpower on the block, will be incredibly important with this. And China actually, despite sort of what has been good and strong growing relations with the Vatican, it was quite shocking that they didn't send anyone to Pope Francis's funeral. And actually, during the time when between the two popes, after Francis has died and before this, they appointed two bishops, which breaks their agreement with the Vatican, because no bishop should be appointed if there is no pope. And that seemingly sank the boat of one of the front runners to be Pope, Cardinal Parolin, who was very significant in that agreement between the Vatican and the People's Republic of China. But certainly, given sort of China's power, there's no way he can ignore this. So China has to be part of what he's doing and how he approaches this. I said after this little bit of a rupture, we'll have to wait and see what comes out of this.
But thank you so much for that fascinating look, Dr. Paul Michael Hedges, Professor of Interreligious Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies.